Good morning, everybody. Welcome today to today's International Women's Days Forum. It's a special. We normally host these forums on a Wednesday, but of course today is International Women's Day, and yeah, we've got some amazing speakers. I'm your host today, Natalie Bungay, so I'll be keeping you all in check and giving you some direction and instructions, and also supporting the speakers here today. But like I said, International Women's Day, it's a really important day to be able to think about, really, especially the industry and the pest control industry and women that work within it. I've been in the industry 22 years now, I think it is. And yeah, certainly in the early 2000s, it was a different face of pest control than it is now in terms of women. And there's a lot more working in the industry, be it technicians or ops managers or even biologists. And academics alike as well. So it's amazing to see that there's a lot more women in the industry. And I'd invite anybody here, whether men and women, everybody is welcome today. And if you put any comments in the chat sections about any experiences that you had personally or what your journey has been into the industry, probably safely say that actually pest control is not one of those industries that's readily mentioned from a career advisor when you're at school or in any other career advisory capacity. But we're trying to certainly change that. But yeah, certainly if anybody has any good stories, put them in the chat sections. You'll see that down the bottom of your screen or possibly to the right. So just a little bit of housekeeping before I go into a bit more of the agenda today. So again, there's 135 of you with us so far. I think most of you are pretty familiar with Zoom, but as a reminder, we've got the chat section, which a few of you are saying hello and good morning, which is great. So keep that going, but also use it if you have any technical issues. So I had a little bit of an issue with mine this morning, so that's maybe why I look a bit different, a bit closer to you. But yeah, if you do any sound or video issues, just put it in the chat section, and my colleagues Sarah and Lauren will be able to help you out with that. And I possibly will try to, but I'm not great with technology, so we'll see. So the chat section, and like I said, share any I say stories that you have, or just any comments that you have around women in pest management, because I think yeah, it's important to highlight that. But like I said, everybody's welcome today. We also have a Q&A section down the bottom. Now that's where at the end of each presentation, I'll obviously invite the speaker to answer your questions, which I need you to put in that Q&A section, because that's the bit I'm going to be keeping an eye on. As I said, if you do accidentally put it in the wrong section, I'll get our colleagues Lauren and Sarah will just give you a heads up to pop it in the Q&A, so I don't want to miss it, because I'm hoping we'll get lots of people commenting in the chat section, so there's a good chance we'll miss it. So Q&A section for questions to the presenters or myself, and in the chat section any technical issues or any just little discussions you want to have or information you want to share with everybody else that's here. We've still got a few that are joining, so give them a bit more time. So today, CPD, as always, there's 3 points for today. If you've pre-registered, those points will be automatically uploaded to your CPD account. If there's a few of you sat around a computer now, watching the screen, maybe 3, 4, 5 of you, it's only going to be that one person that registered for the event that's going to get those CPD points. So make sure afterwards you log on to BPCA registered or Basis Prompt and get those points uploaded. And again, if you're watching this later on, a couple of months down the road, you can do exactly the same. Just make sure you tell us about it, because if you don't, then we won't know about it. Just one more shout out before I do go on to the agenda. So Pest next week, starting on Wednesday, 2 days, Thursday as well. So anybody that hasn't already registered, I wouldn't say it's your last chance, but we're getting close to your last chance to register. There will be an automatic link that's put through on this webinar. Once you're there, you'll see it pop up, and a chance to register and come down to London, see us there. Lots of exhibitors, some amazing seminars and debates and discussions. I'm involved with a few of them myself. You can, as I said, pop onto the Pestex website and have a look at all of those CPD opportunities, networking opportunities, and of course you get to see the BPCA team. What more would you want? So yeah, next week, Pestex. I'm pretty excited about it, I'm not going to lie. Okay, so Just gonna run through just a little bit for today then. So like I said, International Women's Day, we have a plethora of female presenters talking about various subjects. And to begin with, we're going to have, I'll introduce them properly in a moment, but just to run through it quickly, we're going to be talking about mosquito-borne disease, emergence in Britain, and that's Dr. Georgia Kirby from the University of Glasgow. She'll be popping up in a moment. We also then have Sophie Thorogood from Palsys, and Palsys are our sponsors today. We can't do these events without our sponsors supporting us, the manufacturers and distributors. And yeah, I'll say an extra thank you to Palsys today. And Sophie will be talking about the I can't say that word today. Mini menaces. I can't say that word. Let's just say little things that are annoying and their management, but generally around moths today with Sophie. We're going to have a comfort break at 10:55 until 11:05, just better grab a bit of coffee and have a comfort break. And then we'll be coming back and we'll be talking sort of workplace wellness and maximising your productivity and preventing common injuries at work. That's Ellen Fitzgibbons from EMF Coaching. And then just after Ellen, you'll see me pop up. You might think, oh, I would have had enough of you by then, Natalie. But Maisie Bullock from Pest Solutions, we're going to be discussing can the pest management industry be carbon neutral? It's a really important subject that we all need to consider and start thinking about and discussing. BPCA are going to be working on a project, and as I said, Maisie and I are going to be speaking. It's going to be a discussion. We're not going to have a presentation. There's going to be lots of questions around sustainability and what is carbon neutral, things like that. Some common questions that maybe actually we hear, but we don't really necessarily know what the answers are to it. So yeah, an opportunity again to get some discussions going on there. And then just to finish off, I'll just do a quick association news and industry update, just a brief one for you. And yeah, and then you can get on with your days and hopefully, yeah, learn lots of things. And yeah, hopefully it's sunny where you are. It's not particularly where I am at the moment, but hopefully it is for you. Okay, good. So I think we are ready to go. I think most people have probably joined now. I can't see any problems in the chat section of audio and things. No, one of my colleagues would have popped up if there was a major issue. So again, welcome to everybody and thank you for joining us. And without further ado, if I can ask Dr. Georgia Kirby to share or turn your camera on and your audio. I think I can probably see. There we go. Fabulous. Your camera quality looks a lot better than mine today. I'm not going to lie. So, appreciate that. But yeah, if you introduce yourself, you'll do a better job than I will. But yeah, thank you for being with us, and I'll let you do your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Hello everyone. Let me just share my screen 1 second. Okay. And you will see that okay?
That's looking good. Yeah, fabulous.
Brilliant. Thank you. Okay, yes, hello everyone. Thank you everyone for the opportunity to present here. So I'm Georgia Kirby. I'm a postdoctoral researcher at the University of Glasgow, and I'm going to talk this morning about a research project that we're conducting in Scotland to prepare for mosquito-borne disease emergence. So this work is primarily related to mosquito surveillance rather than control, but there are some overlaps because surveillance is often a prerequisite for mosquito control measures, and some of the methods used for surveillance can also be used for control. So I hope this will still be of interest. So just a quick outline of what I'll be talking about. I'm going to start with some general background on mosquito ecology and disease transmission. Then I'll be discussing the importance of mosquito surveillance and go through some surveillance methods. I'll introduce a project that we're working on in Scotland, and then I'll talk through a few of the results from our recent mosquito surveillance work. So I'm sure many of you already know a lot about mosquitoes and similar biting insects, but I thought I would just tell you a little bit about mosquitoes generally, just for anyone who might not be familiar with their biology. So mosquitoes are biting flies in the family Culicidae. There are approximately 3,500 described species of mosquito worldwide, with the highest diversity found in the tropics, but there are also many species living in temperate areas, including in Northern Europe. In terms of their life cycle, mosquitoes breed in standing water. And this could be freshwater wetlands like swamps and ponds and reed beds. It could also be coastal wetlands like salt marsh, small transient habitats like tree holes, puddles and footprints, or artificial habitats like water barrels and plant pots. So I've made a little animation to illustrate the basic life cycle, if this works. So mosquitoes start life as eggs, which are sometimes laid in rafts on the surface or on vegetation in the water. The eggs hatch into larvae, which go through 4 larval stages before they pupate. The pupae then eventually emerge into the flying adults, and then female mosquitoes lay more eggs, and the cycle continues. But there are 2 other kind of important, well, very important things that happened off screen in this animation. So firstly, mating. So males usually emerge before females, and they'll sometimes swarm near to the breeding site, waiting for females to emerge so that they can mate. Females usually only mate once in their lives, but they'll store the sperm from that one event to fertilize all their subsequent batches of eggs. And then the second very important activity is blood feeding. So in a lot of species, female mosquitoes need to take a meal of blood in order to produce their eggs. The males have no need to feed on blood, they don't produce eggs, so instead they just feed on plant sugars. But female blood feeding is, of course, where all the problems with mosquitoes arise, because blood feeding means biting, which, as well as just being annoying, also means there is a risk of disease transmission in some cases. So, as I'm sure you know, mosquitoes can transmit a huge range of diseases, both to humans and to other animals. So I've listed just a few of them here. So they include viruses like dengue, Zika, chikungunya, yellow fever, and West Nile virus, and parasitic diseases like malaria and filariasis. Mosquito-borne diseases cause hundreds of thousands of human deaths each year, many of them children, and mostly in the global south, where the burden of vector-borne disease is disproportionately high. Eradicating and preventing mosquito-borne diseases remains a huge challenge because of the complex and multifaceted nature of disease transmission. So to give a very basic explanation of mosquito-borne disease transmission, if you have an infected host, for instance, a bird with avian malaria, like this bird on the left, a mosquito that bites that bird will take up the malaria-causing pathogen in the blood meal. Then in the right conditions, the pathogen can then develop within the mosquito and eventually migrates to the mosquito's salivary glands. And when the mosquito then goes to take another blood meal and bites another host, it can transmit the pathogen to the new host, and that host can become infected. So that's the essential mechanism of disease transmission, but there are lots of factors that can affect this cycle, including the species of mosquito, the species of host, the type of pathogen, and the environment. So different mosquito species have preferences for different types of hosts. They also vary a lot in their ability to transmit different pathogens. So only certain mosquito species are able to transmit certain diseases to certain hosts. So for example, only certain mosquito species in the genus Anopheles are able to transmit malaria to humans. And we refer to a mosquito's ability to transmit this particular pathogen as its vector competence, which we can also think of as its susceptibility to infection with that pathogen. So different mosquito species also have different behaviors, distributions, and host preferences. And these factors also affect the degree of contact with populations of susceptible hosts. So they affect the likelihood of mosquitoes becoming infected with certain pathogens and spreading them on. Environmental factors also play a massive role in disease transmission. So climatic factors are particularly important. Rainfall is needed for mosquito reproduction because it provides the standing water that's needed for breeding sites. And as well as the presence of rainwater, the timing and pattern of rainfall can be crucial because some mosquito species will only breed in habitats that are permanently wet, while others will lay their eggs in habitats that are subject to cycles of drought and flooding. And then temperature is important in many different ways. So higher temperature generally just speeds everything up. So it speeds up mosquito development and generation time. It speeds up the time it takes for pathogens to become transmissible within the mosquito, and it can increase vector competence. So this is partly why mosquitoes and mosquito-borne diseases are often abundant in hotter areas, particularly areas that also receive a lot of rainfall to support the proliferation of mosquito populations. That said, the relationship between temperature and mosquito-borne disease isn't linear. So mosquitoes can't survive above certain temperatures. it's very hot, they do die off, especially if humidity is low. But in temperate areas, like in Europe, where summer temperatures don't tend to reach that maximum, the limiting factor for mosquito survival is more likely to be winter temperatures. So many invasive tropical species can't survive cold temperatures, so they die off over winter. So when we think of climate change and its effects on mosquitoes, we often tend to think of increasingly hot summer temperatures allowing invasive mosquitoes to kind of thrive and spread. But in temperate regions, increasingly mild winters could also support invasive mosquito populations by allowing them to survive over winter when they wouldn't normally. So hopefully this has made clear that in order to predict mosquito-borne disease risk, we need to have a good understanding of individual mosquito species ecology. And this is where mosquito surveillance comes in. So surveillance is the active monitoring of mosquito populations in an area. It can tell us which species are present, where they live, what they feed on, how they're distributed, and when they're active, which are all key to predicting disease risk. And mosquito surveillance is often combined with pathogen screening, which allows us to estimate the prevalence of any disease-causing pathogens in the mosquito population. So I'll just go through some of the key mosquito species that we find in the UK and why we might want to monitor them. So there are 34 mosquito species that are native to Britain, although only a few of them are of any concern as potential vectors. So as I mentioned earlier, different mosquito species have different feeding preferences. So some will only feed on birds, some will only feed on humans or other mammals, and some will feed opportunistically or indiscriminately on both birds and mammals. And this is actually really important for disease transmission because mosquito species that bite both birds and mammals can transmit zoonotic viruses like West Nile virus from birds to humans. And so we call these species bridge vectors. So these viruses are normally just maintained in a cycle between birds and bird-biting mosquitoes, but every so often they can spill over into humans and also into horses. And so this happens when a bridge vector bites an infected bird, picks up the virus, and then goes and bites a mammal. So one bridge vector species that we're particularly interested in is this one, Culex pipiens. It's also known as the common house mosquito. And it can breed in all sorts of natural habitats. It's very versatile and opportunistic, and it's well adapted to urban areas. So it can also breed in standing water in artificial containers around homes. It's actually a really interesting species in that it has two forms. So it's got its typical form, Culex pipiens pipiens, which mostly bites birds and hibernates as an adult over winter. And then it has this other form known as Culex pipiens molestus, which bites humans as well as birds, and it's active all year round. So the molestus form has adapted to breed in underground habitats like sewage works and flooded basements. So it sometimes causes infestations and nuisance biting in houses. And in fact, in the UK, I believe this species is the most commonly targeted mosquito for domestic pest control. But the main reason that we're interested in this species is because it's a major vector of viruses like West Nile and Asutu virus elsewhere in Europe. And it's also one of the main vectors of avian malaria and avian pox, so it poses this threat to birds as well. Then we have Culex terrentium. This is actually a very similar species to Culex pipiens. It looks basically identical, which is why I've just reversed that image of Culex pipiens there. But as far as we know, it's exclusively bird biting in the UK, and it's more common at northern latitudes. So this is also a vector of West Nile virus and the Asutu virus. And then there's Aedes detritus. This mosquito breeds in salt marsh. And it's an opportunistic feeder, so it will bite birds and humans. So it's a potential bridge vector, and it can cause nuisance biting. This is another confirmed vector of West Nile virus, although it's likely not as efficient at transmitting the virus as the previous two species. So those three species were the main concern in terms of their confirmed ability to transmit viruses. But we also have several other species that pose a risk because they bite birds and mammals, so they could be potential bridge vectors. So here are just a few of them. So firstly, Culiceta annulata. This is a very striking mosquito. It's my personal favorite, purely from an aesthetic perspective. So it's big and it has spotted wings and stripy legs, and it just looks really cool. So for this reason, people often assume it's an invasive mosquito or a particularly dangerous mosquito, which isn't the case. It is a nuisance biter. It loves to bite humans, but it's native to Britain. and it isn't a confirmed vector of any diseases. So this is another species that can breed in all sorts of habitats, including artificial containers, and will also sometimes enter homes. So it can be a nuisance biter. It remains active throughout the year, and it's very widespread and common. Then we have Cochlearsidia ricciardi. So again, this is a nuisance biter. Again, we don't know if it transmits disease. So this species is often very abundant in areas with reed beds and emergent vegetation. It's not so common in urban habitats. And then Anopheles claviger. This species actually doesn't usually cause too much of a nuisance biting problem. It is a mammal biter, but it primarily bites livestock rather than humans. But the main reason I've highlighted it here is because it's able to transmit malaria, and was historically a vector of malaria in the UK. But the chances of it having the opportunity to do that again in Britain in the next few decades is very low. So how do we carry out mosquito surveillance to find out if any of these species are present? So surveillance often involves a network of mosquito traps, which may be placed in specific habitats to target particular species, or in a variety of habitats to understand species composition. So adult mosquitoes are usually targeted, but ideally we try to sample from at least 2 different life stages, because this gives a better indication of population dynamics and species diversity in an area. So there are a number of different ways you can collect adult mosquitoes. You can use methods that you might use to catch other flying insects, like sticky fly traps, sticky fly paper, or light traps, but these are non-specific. So unless you're working in an area of very high mosquito densities, you're not that likely to catch many mosquitoes this way, and instead you'll probably get a lot of non-target insects as bycatch. So effective mosquito traps usually target either host-seeking females or gravid females. So gravid traps exploit the fact that gravid females seek out standing water to lay their eggs. So the traps will contain some water, usually with some vegetation like hay, and females will be trapped when they go to lay their eggs in the water. Because females usually only produce eggs after they've taken a blood meal, capturing gravid females means that you have a higher chance of capturing infected mosquitoes. So this is a good method to use if you're screening the mosquitoes for pathogens. The downside to this method is that many mosquito species won't lay their eggs in this sort of artificial habitat, so it only tends to catch a few particular species, but some of those are important vector species like Culex pipiens, which I mentioned earlier. And then host-seeking traps. So these are the most commonly used traps for mosquito surveillance, and they can typically collect a very wide variety of different species. They can take many different forms, but they're baited with substances that specifically attract female mosquitoes and other biting flies looking for a blood meal. So most often that's carbon dioxide, which mimics respiration of a potential host, but there are other kind of olfactory and thermal attractants that can be used. The disadvantage of using host-seeking traps for pathogen surveillance is that many of the mosquitoes may be recently emerged females looking for their first blood meal, so they may not yet have had a chance to be infected with anything. But it is a useful way of finding out which species are present in an area or a particular habitat at a given time. And with the right bait and trap type, host-seeking traps can catch large numbers of mosquitoes, and they can sometimes be used as a means of short-term local mosquito control as well as surveillance. And then larval sampling, so it usually involves one of these, a dipper. So that's basically a cup on the end of a telescopic pole, which can be used to collect larvae from aquatic habitats. Because different species have different preferences for the type of aquatic habitat they breed in, it's important to try to sample from all of the different habitats in an area to increase the chance of collecting a variety of species. So this is a really good way of understanding species composition and diversity and habitat preferences. The only real downside is that it can be quite laborious in areas where there are lots of potential habitats, but when it's done in combination with adult trapping, you can be reasonably confident that you're sampling a good representation of the mosquito population. So mosquito control is generally most effective at the larval stage. So larval dipping is a really good, or can be a really useful way of identifying breeding sites for control and for source reduction when a mosquito population is causing a nuisance or an infestation. And then finally, you can use traps known as ovitraps to collect mosquito eggs. So this is typically just a black bucket with a bit of water in it and a substrate like polystyrene or wood, which mosquitoes will want to lay their eggs on. And similarly to gravid traps, this only really attracts certain container breeding species, so it isn't a good way of monitoring other mosquito populations. But one of the species that it will attract is the invasive tiger mosquito, Aedes albopictus. So ovitraps are often used effectively to either estimate tiger mosquito densities in endemic areas or check for signs of its presence in areas where it has the potential to invade. So now that I've explained what we can do or what we can learn from mosquito surveillance, I'm going to explain why we're doing it in Scotland and what we're trying to achieve with this project. So this project, Mosquito Scotland, aims to assess the risk of mosquito-borne disease emergence in Scotland through mosquito and pathogen surveillance and modelling. But after what I said earlier about the importance of temperature, you might be wondering how there can be any risk of mosquito-borne disease transmission in Scotland when the temperatures are so low. And that is a reasonable question, because mosquito abundance and diversity and the risk of disease are definitely much lower here than in warmer parts of the world. The main thing is that the risk is likely to increase. So there's this sort of looming threat of mosquito-borne disease in Northern Europe more generally. And so this is our first reason for wanting to start preparing for it in Scotland. So vector-borne diseases have been emerging and spreading elsewhere in Europe in recent decades, and it's largely due to changes in climate and international trade and travel. And this doesn't just apply to mosquito-borne diseases. Tick-borne diseases like Lyme disease and tick-borne encephalitis have also been reported at higher rates across Europe in recent years. Scotland is actually a bit of a Lyme disease hotspot. You might also be aware that dengue and chikungunya have emerged in parts of southern and central Europe, and that's primarily due to the incursion of Aedes albopictus, which I mentioned just before. So this is a tropical mosquito species, but it's very adaptable and it can breed in artificial habitats such as used tyres. And this has led to it being imported into new areas via the movement of goods and transport. At the moment, temperatures in most of Britain, and especially in Scotland, are still thought to be too low for the widespread establishment of Aedes albopictus. But as I mentioned, there are lots of mosquitoes that are native to Britain, and some of them already transmit diseases like avian malaria and avian pox to birds, so they pose a threat to wildlife health and conservation efforts. As I also mentioned, some of these native species can also transmit zoonotic viruses from birds to humans, and the main zoonotic diseases of concern are West Nile virus and Esutu virus, which are spreading further north and further west in Europe. And these viruses could potentially be imported into Scotland and elsewhere in Britain by northward flying migratory birds from endemic areas in Central Europe. So the second reason that we're focusing specifically on Scotland is because kind of systematic mosquito surveillance hasn't previously been carried out in Scotland. So we have this huge knowledge gap about which mosquito species are here and how they're distributed. So as an example, these are just maps of distributions of a few important mosquito species in Europe. And you'll see that there's no data for Scotland at present. So as I said earlier, mosquito surveillance can tell us about which species are present and where they live. And this information can be used as a baseline to monitor changes in mosquito distributions, predict how they respond to environmental changes, and model the risk of disease outbreaks. And this is particularly important because changes to the Scottish climate, like warmer summers, milder winters, and also wetter springs, are likely to make conditions increasingly favourable for a wide range of mosquito species. So we need to prepare for future risk. It's important to say that there are no mosquito-borne diseases of public health concern circulating in Scotland at the moment that we're aware of, but it's something that we just need to keep an eye on and be prepared for, because it's clear that climate change is likely to enable mosquito-borne diseases to emerge at increasingly high latitudes, so further and further north within Europe, as the weather patterns change and the average temperatures increase. So our project is made up of 4 components. So mosquito surveillance, screening mosquitoes and birds for pathogens, testing the vector competence of native mosquitoes, and modelling environmental and epidemiological risk. So we have this lovely team based at the University of Glasgow and our partners, the UK Health Security Agency and the UK Centre for Ecology and Hydrology. So I'm going to just talk a little about the mosquito surveillance work. So we've completed 1 field season of this, and we're about to start the second. And our main objective here is characterisation of mosquito ecology in Scotland to give us insights into distributions and abundance, and consequently an understanding of which areas within Scotland are most at risk of mosquito-borne disease. We also want to identify environmental conditions that are favourable to potential vector species, so that we can do predictive modelling of disease risk under future climatic conditions. So we've taken two main approaches to this so far. So one part of this is being done by a PhD student, Mishak Lee, and he's looking at mosquito species composition across an urban to rural gradient in West Scotland to evaluate the risk of a human exposure to mosquito-borne disease. The other approach is conducting mosquito surveillance at wetland sites across the country, which is the work I've been leading and I'll be telling you about just now. So the rationale for surveying at wetlands is because British mosquitoes typically depend on wetland habitats. It's only a few of them that kind of live in these artificial habitats. And certain species are associated with particular wetland types. So by sampling at a range of wetlands, we hoped to collect a variety of different species. So we primarily targeted 5 wetland types: coastal salt marsh, wet woodland, wet grassland, ponds, and reed beds. And we identified 22 wetland sites across mainland Scotland, and on the right there is a map of their locations. So this is just an indication of some of the mosquito species that we might expect to find at each wetland type. So the ones coloured in purple are species that we know can transmit disease, and the ones in orange are species that might cause nuisance biting or could potentially be bridge vectors. In terms of our methods, we visited each site approximately once a month between June and October to carry out adult and larval sampling. We set up host-seeking traps in the target wetland to catch adult mosquitoes. So we use these small battery-powered traps, which can be hung from vegetation. And we baited them with dry ice, which attracts mosquitoes because it releases this plume of carbon dioxide. We ran these traps for 48 hours at a time at each site, and we also dipped for mosquito larvae in aquatic habitats within a 50-metre radius of each trap site. And at the same time, we took measurements of the larval habitats, like the water temperature, the pH, the salinity, and the conductivity. And we set up data loggers to record ambient temperature and humidity throughout the season. So just a quick run through of some of our preliminary results. So we found just under 2,000 adult mosquitoes over 178 trap nights, which averaged to approximately 11 mosquitoes per night. We also identified 860 larvae from a variety of natural and artificial habitats. We found mosquitoes at 21 of the 22 sites that we sampled at. So the only site where we didn't find any was a blanket bog site in the northwest of the country. So these circles here represent average adult abundance per trap night. And in some areas like this reed bed habitat in the east, we caught over 80 adults per night, which is a much higher density than we expected. This is just a breakdown of the different species. So we identified 16 different species in total, including several potential vector species and nuisance biting species. The most abundant species at the adult stage was Cochleartidia ricciardi. So this made up more than a third of our samples. This is a species that hadn't previously been recorded in Scotland. So more than anything, it just illustrates how limited the previous mosquito sampling in Scotland has been. In general, we tended to find higher mosquito species diversity at sites that encompass several different habitats, and particularly sites with reed beds and ponds. So as I mentioned earlier, we're particularly interested in Culex pipiens. So this is just a map of where we found it. So we found it at 14 of the sites with the highest densities in southern Scotland. But as you'll see, we also found a small population even at the far north. We'll be targeting this species specifically in our upcoming field season so that we can characterise its seasonality and population dynamics, which should help us to do some epidemiological modelling. And so that brings me on to our next steps. So as well as the active surveillance that we're doing, we also want to do some passive surveillance in the form of citizen science reports. We're particularly interested in finding populations of the human-biting form of Culex pipiens, Culex molestus. And as I mentioned, this is a major nuisance biter in urban areas, so we're encouraging people to report any mosquito nuisance biting to us. So we're setting up this online mosquito reporting website with guidance on mosquito recognition. There's a portal that will allow members of the public to send in photos of mosquitoes that they spot in Scotland and let us know where they found them. So this should enable us to fill in some of the gaps in our field surveillance. And so just to quickly explain how all of this mosquito surveillance feeds into the overall project and what we'll be doing with the data. So all of the mosquitoes that we've collected, as well as the large number of migratory and resident birds, will be screened for a wide range of pathogens. So we'll know if there are any potential diseases that could be circulating that we need to be aware of. We also have some colonies of Culex pipiens in the lab, so we'll be testing their ability to transmit viruses at different temperatures, including typical Scottish summer temperatures, to give an indication of whether these viruses could establish in Scotland if they were introduced. Our surveillance data will be used then in environmental models to identify associations between species distributions and environmental variables like climate and land use. And our Culex pipien surveillance and vector competence data will be used in a model to predict the probability of zoonotic virus establishment in Scotland. So just to summarise, so mosquito surveillance is a really important tool for monitoring and predicting disease risk. It can also give insights into how best to control and manage different mosquito species by providing information about their habitats and ecology. Our surveillance project in Scotland will hopefully increase our preparedness for future disease risk by revealing more about mosquitoes' distributions and ecology. Just very quickly, so lots of people contributed to this work, including our research team, our collaborating organisations and our funders, UKRI and DEFRA. Yeah, thank you all very much for listening and can I take any questions?
Great, thank you so much for that. We've got a couple of questions coming. I had one question come in that I've asked an extra question because I'm not sure what they were getting at, but we'll get to it and I'll see if I can read it out and you might understand what they're asking. But there's a lot more species of mosquitoes in the UK, I think, than most of us probably actually really realised or thought about. So I suppose the identification of the species can be difficult, can't it? Like you explained in the beginning. And that's pretty interesting for everybody to kind of take on board and think about. But the question we've got, so Christian says, why isn't HIV transmitted by mosquitoes?
Why isn't HIV transmitted by mosquitoes?
Yes, yeah. And maybe that's an assumption rather than do they? Can they?
No, it's not transmitted by mosquitoes. I am not a virologist, but it's only certain types of virus that are able to develop within mosquitoes and become transmissible, basically. So it's only, I'm not sure what the actual mechanism of that is, but it's kind of a limited number of viruses that can do that, basically.
Yeah, makes like you say, it's that it just doesn't have that ability to go through. We have that with the bed bugs quite a lot, in terms of they have all the tools to be able to transmit diseases, but they don't generally tend to, or we don't see that they do. So yeah, it's always an interesting question people come up with. A couple more come in. So Alex here has said surveillance is a fantastic tool, but what opinions do we have for what options do we have for vector control programs as mosquito control in other places, such as in the Middle East and the Far East, is a much more abrasive process, which will not be suitable for UK ecology. So what are our options?
Yeah, that's a good question. So a lot of, I think in general, because so many of the mosquito species in the UK are, they live in natural wetlands rather than in kind of domestic areas. If they become a nuisance, a nuisance in terms of their biting in kind of outdoor areas, the best option for that, I think, generally is source reduction, environmental management of wetland areas. But then around homes, again, source reduction of any larval breeding sites, particularly. So this species, Culex pipiens molestus, which breeds underground. If you can find where that's breeding, it's often, like I said, it's kind of been like a flooded basement. If you can find where that is and then just eliminate the water source, that's basically got rid of them.
Yeah. Things like water butts in gardens, maybe, or maybe even guttering that have standing water.
Absolutely, yeah. These are some of the main areas where you get these kind of urban mosquitoes living, and so yeah, I think just encouraging people to look out for areas around their homes where there could be mosquitoes breeding, where there's any standing water, which includes in kind of like paddling pools or like overflowing drains. Yeah.
Yeah, we're certainly going to naturally always do on these forums. A lot of people here are the practical implementation of dealing with mosquitoes. They're going to be interested in, how can we deal with that? I know it's necessarily your presentation is fully about, but with your knowledge here, they're going to be wanting to gain some of that. But yeah, we see a lot in the summer, especially when customers complain of, biting insects, and they'll blame bed bugs or fleas and things like that quite a lot. But actually, a lot of the time it can be that they're getting bitten by mosquitoes, from that standing water they've got nearby. And yeah, it's something for pest controllers to think about a little bit more. That's great. So Amy said, forgive me if this was already answered and I missed it, but are you aware of any studies similar to what you are doing being done in Northern Ireland?
I believe there is actually a project just starting at the moment, similar to ours, that is looking at the mosquitoes of Northern Ireland. I can't give any more information than that, but I think that is happening. It's kind of a recent initiative to for similar reasons as us, wanting to find out more about the ecology of Northern Irish mosquitoes, because there hasn't been studied before, and I believe this is starting right now.
Yeah,
so there should be some results coming in soon.
Indeed. Is it mostly due to climate change that you think we're becoming more concerned of, any insect really that breeds outside, but with mosquitoes especially?
Yeah, definitely. I think this is a huge driving force for kind of just the spread of mosquitoes into new areas, like including invasive mosquitoes, but also native mosquitoes being able to transmit these pathogens, these diseases, when they wouldn't previously have been able to, because temperatures just weren't high enough to facilitate that. So it is definitely a huge concern, really.
Yeah,
We're
no,
already seeing
absolutely.
the changes.
Yeah, get asked that question quite a lot from different forums about climate change, whether it affects pest management. Yeah, I think insects across the board, they'll have an effect in some way.
Oh yeah, definitely. Other vectors as well, for sure. Like
Yeah,
ticks and black flies and midges even.
of course. Yeah,
Which
yeah,
we obviously have
ticks.
lots
Yeah,
of
I've
in
noticed
Scotland.
a few more people talking about those. Yeah. Natalie, I won't go into that. So I go off a tangent. I can ask all these questions that just nothing to do with what you've been talking about. So I'll stop myself. And I'll go back to the question. So I think I'm going to put this out there how it's intended. This is from Mike. He said, how bad is the mosquito infestation in the fen areas of Cambridgeshire, mostly in the March area? It's an area, isn't it? I'm not sure if you're familiar with Cambridgeshire and the studies there.
I know there have been studies around that area. It's not something I'm that familiar with, but I know that historically there's been a real problem around kind of fens in southeast England in general. You do get certain species that kind of thrive in that sort of habitat, and they are really nuisance biters. They love to bite humans. I don't know much about the current situation there, but I think it is attributed to like just one or two like fen species.
Yeah.
I'm sorry if I didn't really answer your question.
Oh no, that was great. So we got a question: how can we differentiate midges from mosquitoes?
That's a good question. Actually, so our website, not to self-promote, but our website that we're launching is giving some guidance on how to recognize a mosquito and differentiate it from other similar biting insects like midges and horseflies as well. So midges are actually much smaller than mosquitoes. I'm trying to think of a kind of size comparison. So midge is probably the size of like maybe half a grain of rice.
Yeah.
Probably actually even smaller than that. Whereas a mosquito, oh, maybe like I don't know why I'm sticking with rice, but it's like maybe like a big grain of
We
rice.
use that a lot,
Maybe
don't
like
worry. We talk about mouse poo and things like that, and we compare it to grains of rice. So it's good.
A mosquito also has a much longer body. And a midge has kind of these little spotted wings. They're actually kind of pretty to look at, in fact, if you ever see them. I mean, I only see them under the microscope, so you can't really tell when they're actually on you, biting you. But yeah, midges are much smaller is the main difference, I would say.
Yeah. Do you think it's quite important to be able to have that magnification, to be able to get the identification of, and I mean, I've definitely, I suppose, the specific mosquito species, but the midges and the difference between the two, and whether or not you're just sort of having it, in your hand or on the wall or wherever they may be, is that's probably, I don't know, is that pretty hard to identify, I think?
Definitely you can't identify them to species level without the magnification. Well, in most cases you can't without magnification, but By eye, you should be able to differentiate between midges and mosquitoes fairly easily. So another thing actually is their behavior, because midges you often find in a kind of swarm. They'll be just constantly loads of them biting you at once. Anyone who's been to Scotland will have experienced this.
Mm.
But a mosquito, it will just be, apart from the males when they kind of swarm for mating, female mosquitoes don't swarm in general. So you just get one at a time. And they'll also just, the mosquitoes tend to rest on walls after they've bitten. So you'll see, if you see something just kind of sitting on a wall, that's probably a mosquito in it, if something's bitten you.
Yeah. Great. I think I'm reading this question out right. I'm not sure, but mosquitoes are they able to breed in backwater? But then they said I mean saline water, so I'm not. I think they mean saline water. Yeah.
Yeah. So one, not exactly saline water, but kind of brackish water, so slightly salty water. It's just a couple of species, at least in the UK, there are a couple of species that are able to do this. So there's Aedes detritus, which I think I mentioned, the salt marsh mosquito, and then also Aedes caspius and Aedes dorsalis. And these are all human biters, but they're, the majority of British species cannot breed in kind of salty water. It's fresh water only.
Freshwater, fabulous. And I think you already answered this, but I just wanted to shout it out there because Paul's asked it, and you mentioned again about Northern Ireland and data that you might have on mosquito incidents.
I don't have any data about Northern Ireland mosquitoes, I'm afraid. If anyone is interested, I can probably find some information to share later. But yeah.
Fabulous. You mentioned about the your website a few little bits, maybe the differences like midges and mosquitoes and identification. Would you mind like sharing a link in the chat section when we're done? Is that all right? If you got access to that, that'd be great.
I would love to. We actually haven't officially launched it yet, but if I could share it with you to share with your everyone at a later date, possibly like next week, that would be amazing if people are interested.
Yeah, I know I'm making a note now to remind myself. Yeah, we'll definitely have that. All those tools are just, we deal with so many different pest species, and obviously that identification side of it, and where we can have extra resources to be able to go and do CPD as well as just sort of generally read up on it. It would be an amazing help. So yeah, I really appreciate that. Great. They're all the questions that are in there. For now, I said everybody's making some comments, and that have been very helpful for them and informative. We don't talk about mosquitoes enough, I think. So certainly coming up to the season, maybe ish. It was fabulous to have you. So really appreciate that, Georgia. Done an amazing job, and thank you for being with us again.
All right, thank you everyone for your questions. Thanks.
Take care now. Thank you.
Thanks.